people say that, blue collar jobs are going to be safe and the white collar jobs are going to be eliminated. I think we might be failing by oversimplifying that. And what we really need to do is to dig down to the discipline level and to sort through, well, which of those professions, might be enhanced or might be safe in the context of AI and which are at risk. We've talked about design a little bit. I think if we rest on our laurels and just assume that a career in the trades is going to be completely safe, then we might miss where AI is going to swoop in and disrupt some of these skills and some of these jobs. So I think the advice I would have is really to get down to the discipline level, to understand where this is going, and to see where there might be opportunities, and to see where we need to be prepared for some disruption. So really not relying on this idea that all trades are going to be safe, because I don't think that's true.
Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. My name is Matt Kirchner. We are securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent here at the #1 podcast in all of STEM and technical education. As a reminder, we are routinely ranked in the top 1% of 1% of technology podcasts around the globe. So great to have you with us. I want to start before we introduce today's guest with just two quick anecdotes. The first one is this: if you haven't already checked out the blog post by Matt Schumer, it's got something like 50 million views and 50 million shares, something along those lines. It's just absolutely incredible. A little bit scary, all about artificial intelligence, particularly generative AI. I want to pull really briefly a few stats from that particular blog post that we'll be sure to put in the show notes. He said, number one, in 2022, AI couldn't do basic arithmetic reliably. It would confidently tell you that 7 times 8 is 54. By 2023, a year later, it could pass the bar exam. A year after that, in 2024, it could write working software and explain graduate level science. By late 2025, some of the best engineers in the world were saying they had handed over most of their coding work to AI. And then early in February 2026, new models, particularly ChatGPT's Codex 5.3, arrived that made everything before them look like a different era. You think about just the last 3 or 4 years and the incredible amount of innovation that's happened in the world of generative artificial intelligence. I want to tie that to another thing. For years, we have been saying that GPTs are awesome generative pre-trained transformers. If you haven't used one, most of us have Claude, Perplexity, Meta AI, ChatGPT, of course. They're amazing. We have been huge believers here at the Tech Ed Podcast that the future of AI is about applied artificial intelligence. Some call it physical AI, some call it embodied AI. And then, of course, at the Consumer Electronics Show in late 2025, Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, the largest company in the world by market share, stood up on the stage and said, oh, guess what? The future of artificial intelligence is in applied AI and physical AI. So it looks like we might have been right about that one. Not the only thing that we've been right about here on the Tech Ed Podcast, but we're going to bring all of these ideas together on this episode. This whole idea that generative AI and AI in general is innovating and advancing at speeds that nobody thought possible, or at least very few of us thought possible. And second of all, that the future of artificial intelligence, in my opinion, is all around embodied AI and physical AI. We are going to do that with someone who's got a fascinating background doing some really, really interesting things at the community college level and has a whole bunch of ideas about both of these topics that we just introduced. His name is Dr. Andrew Neuendorf, Associate Dean of Manufacturing, Engineering, Trades, and Transportation at Des Moines Area Community College. I've been on that campus several times. It's commonly known as DMACC. And for starters, Andrew, just awesome to have you with us, and thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really excited about this.
So like most individuals who are working in manufacturing, transportation, engineering, you started in the field of English. Just so, just so our listeners know that you started as an English professor, which I think is really, really cool. I'm sure we'll explore some of that as we spend some time here together. You're now the Associate Dean of Manufacturing, Engineering, Trades, and Transportation, as we mentioned. That is a really, really crazy switch from English to what you're doing now. Tell us about what prompted that shift, and what about CTE has you so interested in this endeavor?
So more or less, the issue is that I have trouble saying no, which is something I'm working on. Uh, you know, about 10 years ago, when I was the chair of the Humanities department at DMACC, I was asked by the vice president of academic affairs to kind of move into a different role, working on assessment college-wide. And so, assessment is this kind of complicated process where you're working with your accrediting bodies. You're trying to verify that your students are learning. You're showing that you're taking action and closing the loop. And, as soon as I started moving into that world, I had to walk out of the humanities building and go to the automotive department meeting and the welding department meeting, and was almost like instantly fascinated by the different approaches that they were taking to assessment and learning, and kind of complementary to the liberal arts world. And so they were really focused obviously on workforce, on industry standards. There was that real clarity in trying to make sure their students were able to do what they needed to do to get work in the industry and to keep up and to change. And, that was very different from the world that I was in, and I really was drawn to that. And so really learned a lot, had to work with all of the programs. And as I stepped into that world, I saw that there was this kind of balance in the community college system. You had in the liberal arts world, often focused on transfer, on general knowledge, learning about cultures and languages. And then on the other side of the house, it was very, very practical. So there's this kind of excerpt from a book that I used to teach in British literature called The Idea of the University by Cardinal Newman. And he is kind of one of the first instances where the sort of differences between what we call CTE and liberal arts were sort of fleshed out. And he talks about the philosopher and the mechanic. And so he talks about the philosophers being, your typical kind of liberal arts world, and the mechanic obviously needs to be instantly applied and practical. And that sort of dynamic, has never left me. And I've often thought that, usually you have these two houses in the community college, the career and technical and liberal arts and sciences. And, if you lean too far one way or the other, you're going to be out of balance. So try to keep those in perspective. So again, moving into that career and technical world, it's just like every day there's something for me to learn that's new, that's exciting, but really have just come to really appreciate what happens, on this side of the house, and how faculty and, advisory committees and industry are working together, just keep moving the ball forward.
So this conversation is going to be really a lot of fun for me. I can tell already. As somebody, and I think most of our listeners know this, but I started out in the world of business. So I have a business degree from a liberal arts university. So graduated from Marquette University more years ago than I care to admit. And the truth of the matter is that as important as the technical side of what I learned in business school was, we were required at that time to take 9 credits of philosophy, to take 9 credits of theology, to take history, to take English as part of our business degrees. And I've often said that I learned as much in those classes about life and about being successful in whatever came after college as I did in some of the technical ones, maybe even more. So I'm fascinated by this. A lot of times people are a little bit surprised to find out that I migrated from the business world. A lot of folks these days mistake me for an engineer, for better or for worse, but I started out in business. And then, of course, after a career of 25 years in advanced manufacturing, fascinated by technology, working early on in the RFID and tech space, ended up spending a lot more time on tech than I did on the business side of what I do. So super, super fascinated, but I agree with you. I mean, I think there's this whole continuum and this whole connection between you can go too far in one direction or the other. And if we get too technical, we can get ourselves in trouble. And of course, if we just spend too much time in the esoteric world, it's hard in some cases to make a living, to be able to drive technology and innovation forward. So 100% in agreement with you, Andrew, that we have to live kind of in the middle of that. So let's talk about this. AI means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. We've already talked about GPTs. We've talked about physical embodied and applied artificial intelligence. As somebody from the humanities side of faculty, how do you define AI? And then now that you're over on the CTE side, how would you say it? Is that definition the same, or do people look at it differently?
Well, I mean, I think, nowadays when people talk about AI, they almost entirely mean, chat GPT, large language models. But, when this conversation first started happening in our area, the robotics faculty kind of pointed out, they said, oh, well, we've been doing AI for a long time. And,
Right.
and they're talking about vision systems and machine learning. And, even like in our automotive department, they have, all the driver assisted sensors and things that they work on. And that's all artificial intelligence.
For sure.
But, they've changed their tune a little bit over the last couple of years because of the explosion of what the large language models can do. And so now, they're really engaging with that. And then I would say, in the world of liberal arts, it's a whole different beast when these models are replicating what you want your students to learn, and there's this kind of almost existential threat of everything we're teaching these these AIs are going to be able to do, and how are we going to be able to reach our students, and are they just all plagiarizing? And those are all really real serious issues they have to deal with. So when they talk about AI, it's a lot of it coming from this, I'd say rightly so, like a defensive posture, like how are we going to protect our traditions? I would say too, on career and technical, then it is not just another tool, but you know, that's how in our area we have to respond to it is, well, how can we adapt? And when industry starts asking, hey, how are you using this? And sometimes saying, hey, you need to start teaching your students these skills, there's really no room to dig in. I mean, it's just part of what career and technical programs do in community colleges.
That's right, and that's what I love about the technical college model as we have in my home state of Wisconsin, the community college model as you have there in Iowa. As I mentioned earlier, I've been to your campus several times. You think about the FANUC robots that you have in your automation or robotics program, and you're right. I mean, we've been seeing for 10 years, and it's going on longer than that, that those have all kinds of smart sensors on them, measuring things like forest temperature, disturbances, and so on, sending all that information up to the cloud where it was more algorithmic AI, if you will. I guess it's all algorithmic, but we weren't talking about deep learning and so on at that time and neural networks. But the ability to predict the future failure of that robot and have the robot order its own replacement parts before the failure ever happens, that is all artificial intelligence. And you're exactly right. So it's alive and well on the CTE side. You talk about automotive sensors and so on. Absolutely. We see it in the advanced manufacturing side, whether it's conveyors or programmable logic controllers or, any of the technologies that we see on a manufacturing line. And so we've been using AI in one form or another for quite some time on the CTE side. And that really kind of speaks to this whole idea of applied artificial intelligence. And to your point, and I agree 100%, when people think of AI, they think of generative pre-trained transformers. They think of ChatGPT, or as we suggested earlier, Perplexity, Claude, Meta, a Copilot. But I believe that the real future of AI is around the physical and embodied AI. And we're seeing so much of that now. We're seeing it in everything from humanoid robots to autonomous vehicles and so on, drone technology. That's all applied artificial intelligence and physical AI. So let's talk about that a bit. I could go into what sparked my interest and passion for applied AI, but what kind of got you going down that front, Andrew?
Well, I've always had kind of a techie side. When I was in high school, a friend and I, we made a website about the JFK assassination conspiracy, which was
Okay.
to tell you how fun I was in high school. But um, and so when these new things arise, I'm typically pretty interested in them. But moving into this role where I'm at now, really kind of a light bulb moment for me. We visited a very automated facility, robots, sorting vials and conveyors and sensors, and that was kind of one of the first facilities I visited where all that was together. And
Hmm.
what they were doing was pulling data from the PLCs and the sensors, and they were doing data modeling with Power BI to really kind of track the efficiency of the facility.
Hmm.
And, the discussion at that time, which is, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago, is that, really exploring how to use AI to do that data modeling. And so I kind of instantly saw that, wow, this has an instant practical side for manufacturing facilities. And I could see, trying to encourage our students to pick up a few of these skills to make them to add some skills for their employment, and so that they can start to learn, what these automated facilities are doing with AI. And so that was a call to arms in a sense where, okay, we need to start looking at how our areas can start to embed, some of these skills. And then, fairly recently, the Department of Labor came out with some AI literacy kind of requirements that they're asking everybody to address. And so really the time is now. So kind of personally, I've always had an interest in tech, but also, on the job now, it's a kind of too late to sit and wait. We have to kind of see how we can respond to it. And then, personally, my wife also works in AI space. And so we're all kind of having these conversations at home all the time. Like, oh, did you see this? And did you see, what this CEO is talking about and this new release? And so it's just kind of always in the air.
Absolutely, always in the air for sure. Before I reflect on the last part of that answer, I want to go back to the first part of it. I too am a JFK assassination. I guess I'm just fascinated by it. I don't know what word to use for it. When I was a kid, my parents had this book called The Torches Passed, and it was the whole story from the time that that the tragic assassination of JFK, who to this day is still one of my favorite presidents. I've always been a huge fan of JFK and fascinated by his presidency. So obviously, the tragic end that happened that took was a terrible thing that happened here in our country. Sparked, as you suggest, all kinds of conspiracy theories. But I've been fascinated by that whole story. I wasn't alive at that time, but I've just been fascinated by it for years and years. A website about the Kennedy assassination. You got to at least give us a sentence or two on what that was about before I can't
Well,
let that one
so,
go.
the thing is then, eventually the website was cited as a reference in a kind of a conspiracy, textbook. So I've
Okay.
got it somewhere. Now the website I don't think is out there or active anymore, but
Okay.
we put together some kind of photographic evidence and so that was captured by this author in the book. I'm not sure why. I think we had a class, history class or something where this topic came up and we had to debate it. And so we got really into it. And so like I said, you can kind of tell what I was like in high school.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You and me both, probably. So I didn't know we'd be talking about the Kennedy assassination, which I'm fascinated by. But also want to just harken back a little bit to a few of the things you said, Andrew, in the last answer around the manufacturing technology. And I'm sure our listeners followed all of that. But as you think about what's happening in manufacturing with smart sensors and smart devices on the edge, they now have embedded intelligence. They have the ability to make their own decisions and to communicate with each other, which is transforming manufacturing, sending that data to a PLC, which I learned early on after moving from manufacturing to the world of education, that a PLC in manufacturing is a programmable logic controller, not as we call it in education, a professional learning community, two different things, but we're not sending information to a professional learning community. It is indeed a programmable logic controller, which is the computer of manufacturing. And then you think about Power BI and the ability to extract data, to format data, and then most importantly, to visualize it, right? So we're taking information from that manufacturing line and putting it into a context that individuals can understand what's happening and understand what's taking place. And then you advance that then to the artificial intelligence side of it, which becomes even more fascinating. So let's get into that a little bit. This whole idea of AI being framed as something new. To your point, it's been around for quite some time, been embedded in manufacturing. How are we teaching that now in maybe our technical and community college programs without even calling it artificial intelligence? Dive into that a little bit.
Yes. So mostly our programs are geared toward training that tech to go and work with an engineering team. So like our robotics program is robotics and control systems engineering, and maybe geared up for that automation tech role. So a lot of what happens then is that they need to be able to interface with the sensors and PLCs to do a little bit of troubleshooting, perhaps on the programming, certainly integrate it within the automated facility. So there's a lot of, the basic electrical and wiring that goes on, but also they learn ladder logic and they learn how to interface with the PLC and the programming. And so, all of that is from a tech's perspective, the ability to know enough that they can solve problems. Maybe if they've, purchased a new robot, they can help with the installation and integrate it into the automated system. So it's really that applied and hands-on work. Now, I know that in our IT pathways, they're much more engaged on the development side with AI and learning some of that programming associated with machine learning. And we do have a 2-year degree in artificial intelligence now at DMACC, and we've partnered with Intel, and that's in another pathway that we do some work with as well. So really focused on those technicians. Typically, that's going to be a 2-year degree that work in these automated facilities, and again, maybe working under an engineer or with an engineer. And it's really a lot of hardware, a lot of networking that happens as well, and then that interfacing with the sensors and PLCs that does require some of that knowledge of basic programming and HMIs and all that kind of integration.
So let's talk about the employer side of it. I was in Atlanta about 3 weeks ago, Andrew, at the invitation of Dr. Catherine Frank, who's the chancellor at the University of Wisconsin Stout, somebody I've worked really, really closely with on a number of different projects. Tremendous respect for Catherine, and she had invited me to deliver the keynote address at this academic chairpersons conference. So, as you know, and our audience can probably guess, these are the individuals who are chairing academic programs across higher education, community college, technical college, four-year university and beyond. And the whole topic was about artificial intelligence and applied AI. One of the pieces of advice that I gave those individuals from across all these different disciplines, not just technology or manufacturing, was I started out with a slide that said, when it comes to AI, always listen to your advisory board. So you think about every technical and community college has advisory boards for its program. So if you have an electromechanical program, an automation program, a robotics program, industrial maintenance program, what have you, those are going to have an advisory board that's advising faculty and advising the dean and the program chair about what's happening in industry. And after I put that slide up, always listen to your advisory boards, I put a big word "don't" at the top of that. And it said, don't always listen to your advisory boards. The concept there, I'm curious if you agree, is that, we went through the Industry 4.0 movement, 7, 8, 9 years ago, whatever it was. And what we were saying then is there are certain areas in which education has to lead industry, that if you wait for your industrial partners to start asking for some of this stuff, is going to be too late. I'm a believer that AI is one of those areas that if we wait for industrial employers to say, hey, we need to be teaching our students AI, and here's exactly what they need to know, that we're going to be behind the eight ball, that we have to be introducing this into our programs now so that we're producing career ready talent when the employers are starting to ask for that talent. Do you agree or disagree? And then maybe a little bit about what you're hearing from your industrial employers when it comes to AI.
Yeah, I mean, I agree to an extent. We definitely have to have our curriculum approved by our advisory boards, and so we're really relying on that. But what we're kind of starting to see is that some of the application of AI is coming, from the students. And, a perfect example, one of our robotics programs, a student suggested, they were working on like an old Epson robot as kind of a project. They're trying to bring it back to life. And so, instead of, flipping through the manual and reading the whole thing, they put the manual as well as some other information into Notebook LM, which is kind of one of my favorite AI tools. And, they said they saved, 3 days of work because they could just do queries with Notebook LM, instead of flipping all the way through the manual. It helped them kind of do some troubleshooting and repair that robot. So that's a great example of where I think, students are probably going to start leading some of these conversations. And, always good to have students as part of the advisory committee as well. But, you know, there's a lot more kind of experimentation that can happen in an education environment when we're not necessarily worried about, meeting our numbers. And so these types of projects might actually be really fruitful for informing industry on how AI can be used. And I know that those committees are also coming to us and asking what we're doing so that they can learn as well. I think we're probably in about the same spot right now, and so there can be some really good conversations with education and industry as we try to figure out together. And then you throw in innovative students in the mix. We could really see some progress in how some of these tools will be applied.
Yeah, it's gonna be so exciting to watch, and I agree with you. I keynoted an event at a K-12 district about 2 weeks ago, and one of the individuals in the audience, raised their hand at the end and during the Q&A period and said, what should we be teaching our students about how to use ChatGPT? And, I laughed a little bit. I didn't want to be condescending or inappropriate, but I said, there's nothing you're going to teach your students about ChatGPT that they don't already know. If you knew what to teach your students about ChatGPT, you wouldn't be inviting me to come in and talk about the advent of AI in education. The truth of the matter is that we're probably going to learn more from the students about this than we're going to be able to teach them. I do think when it comes to the ethical applications and use of artificial intelligence, particularly GPTs, there's a role for adults, if you will, or for, those of us that are a little further into life or our careers or what have you, to lend some knowledge and some experience and wisdom when it comes to how we use these things ethically and how we don't use them, for sure. But in terms of how to prompt ChatGPT to answer a question or how to build a relationship with a generative pre-trained transformer, what have you, we're going to learn that from our students, not the other way around. I do talk to First of all, there's been a switch in the last several years, I think, maybe the last two, and there's quite a bit of research that would support this, that, 2 or 3 years ago, when you would ask an employer about AI and the use of AI, they would kind of shrug their shoulders and say, nah, I'm not so sure it's going to really affect anything in our organization. In fact, our media company, the Tech Ed Media Group that owns the podcast, did a survey in the state of Wisconsin not quite 2 years ago, which seems like it was literally 18 months ago, and it feels like an eternity in the world of AI. But more than a third of the respondents said they didn't think that there was going to be much of an impact on their organization in the age of artificial intelligence. 18 months ago, nobody's saying that, which is just gives you a sense for how quickly some of this is moving. But I do believe, just to underscore my earlier point, that the work that you're doing in advocating for applied artificial intelligence and advocating for the use of AI and building it into your programs, in also understanding that you're probably where your industrial employers are. I would argue, given the conversation we're having, that you're probably a little bit ahead of a lot of them. But either way, all kinds of opportunities for education to lead on artificial intelligence. Super excited about that. We can only do that if we have, the entire organization pulling in the same direction, or at least roughly the same direction. That certainly means college leadership from the standpoint of whether it's a chancellor, a president, a provost, a VP of academics, what have you, at the highest stuff echelons of leadership at a college, and then certainly in the dean and associate dean roles. Super, super important. Also important to have faculty on board as well. What are you hearing from faculty in terms of what they're excited about, and then what are some of their concerns when it comes to AI in education?
Yeah, well, kind of looking at the institution as a whole, mentioned this earlier on kind of one side of the house, when you start dealing with issues of plagiarism, with AI, there's a lot of paperwork involved. There's a lot, you get the judicial officer involved. There's a documentation process, and then there's just this fear that students won't be learning because they're turning everything over to AI. And I think that's a much longer, more complicated conversation. It's certainly going to change how we teach in those areas. So on that side of the house, that's really been a big concern. But by and large, in our area, it seems like there is a willingness to learn, a willingness to adapt, and to see where this goes. There is, as always, concern about jobs being lost. Whether that's a teaching position or a job in industry as well. And one of the things that you probably saw the AI panic in the stock market a couple of weeks ago that happened, and it kind of evened itself out. But one of the things that we noticed was that Autodesk was one of the companies there. And they make software that we use, AutoCAD and Fusion,
Sure.
and Revit as well. And so the fear there of disrupting the software as service industry. And so when you start thinking about, well, how many programs we have that involve that kind of manufacturing design, whether it's our CAD programs or tool and die advanced manufacturing, is that going to mean that we're going to have to learn different software, or is that going to mean that portions of those jobs are going to go away, or AI agents will be doing them? Or so I think that you know that incident kind of made me see that, well, the disruption isn't all going to be on the arts and sciences side. It isn't all going to be just, well, we need to learn these tools and move forward. There could be some real threats to some of the industry fields that we work with, especially that software as service issue.
When you think about it, as we record this, just within the last 5 or 6 days, Block announced a 40% reduction in their workforce, 4,000 people, blaming, I guess, or attributing that to artificial intelligence. There's some people that are saying, well, maybe that's just using AI as an excuse to downsize your workforce. Don't know, but it was interesting. I spent the weekend with four good friends. One of them a former Fortune 500 CEO. The other one runs a huge pediatric program at a gigantic hospital on the East Coast. And when that announcement got made, then we'll link that up in the show notes as well. When Jack Dorsey said, "Hey, we're laying off 40% of our workforce because and this is, by the way, is like Square, Paycom, some of these pay apps that and platforms that we use in retail and elsewhere. These are the folks that really are getting their roles at least disrupted by artificial intelligence, if not wholesale changes in terms of staffing in an organization like that. And I said, this is going to be a pivot point for the economy, that we are going to be in this era where we're going to see more and more huge disruption in the age of artificial intelligence. So the point that we made earlier about the Matt Schumer blog, just what's happened in the world of coding in 2 years, and how, computer scientists now that used to have to sit and write code are having AI do that, and in writing almost perfect code. It frees up their time to do other things, but it's certainly a huge, huge disruption in the economy and in the workforce. So I agree with everything that you just said there. I'm also a believer. We do this Ask Us Anything episode, 3 or 4 times a year, where Melissa, our producer, and I sit down and field questions from the audience and respond to them and discuss them. We had a question, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, give or take, from an instructor, a community college instructor, that says, "Look, I have this experience, or I have this exercise that I give my students, where I have them, find an article that interests them, and then write a synopsis of that article and offer a little bit of opinion about the article and bring it to class." And he said, all they're doing now is finding an article, putting it into a GPT, having the GPT summarize it, copying the response, and then putting it into their homework response. And his question was, what learning is actually happening there? And, to kind of codify our answer a little bit, and I wasn't quite this blunt on the episode, but the answer is no learning is happening there, and it's your fault that there's no learning happening there, because no instructor that has spent any time with a GPT would ask its students to summarize an article that they read, and not expect them to use AI to help do that. And I think that's just the reality of the world we live in. So you're right. There are all kinds of questions about academic dishonesty. There's going to be all kinds of policy shifts, I think, in education, and more important, a morphing of raising the bar for students in terms of what we are expecting them to know, and how we're expecting them to present that knowledge. And it's certainly not going to be summarizing a magazine article anymore. It's going to be all about coming to class, talking about the meaning of article, how it applies to certain academic spaces, or things that they're learning, defending a position without having the ability to just go and look at a GPT to get the answer. That's where education is going. We're entering an era, I believe, where we're, instead of learning at school and doing our homework and practicing outside of the classroom, we're going to be learning at home and then practicing when we get to school. I think a really, really exciting time for education in general. And I think it's going to be, for those institutions that figure out how to do this, a great opportunity to differentiate themselves. To that point, into our earlier point about students in some cases knowing more about AI than the instructors or faculty do, in some cases, not every case, and there's certainly exceptions on both sides. What kind of things are you hearing from instructors in terms of what they're learning from students when it comes to applied artificial intelligence?
Yeah, well, I mentioned the robotics example as well. That's been a big one that has jumped out. But we have an industrial technician program, essentially, training students to work in that automated environment as technicians. So they do, electrical, mechanical, PLCs, hydraulics, pneumatics, every little piece that you would need to be kind of an entry level technician in an automated facility. And there's been this kind of tug and pull of, should we let the students have their phones in the lab? And are there certain things where, they can use their phones and bypass having to learn the knowledge? But one of our instructors is very interested in watching the students' ability to be able to troubleshoot by using their phones, and to look up manuals, and to be able to kind of work their way through a problem by using their phones. And so that's another thing that has come up from the student population. And the tendency to say, pull out your phone for the answer. Maybe 10 years ago we would view that as automatically cheating.
Mhm.
Now, and certainly in applied fields, we're seeing that there's so much information out there, ability to use something like Notebook LM for use of manuals. And so just kind of watching that natural problem solving process involve the use of phones, and kind of no longer seeing that in some fields as cheating, but seeing that as an opportunity to be more efficient and to use and rely on your resources. I mean, we know that these technicians can't, memorize everything. I mean, we know that, an electrician doesn't have the entire, NEC code memorized in their head. But I mean, what if, in these tricky situations, you had ability to talk to an AI, to work through a problem, and to be able to kind of enhance your abilities. And so I think just that natural inclination of the student to pull out the phone to come up with the answer is a process that we should, embrace and look at, and see how AI can help them in the field solve those problems.
And whether it's Notebook LLM, which is fascinating. When we speak to industrial employers, and a lot of them are saying, "Hey, AI, I don't even know where to start with this in manufacturing." One of the things that we recommend is, whether it's that platform or any vector database, right? So we're now in an era where you can take Pinecone or Weaviate, or there's probably 10, 12, 15 of these different platforms that are commonly utilized, and put all of your manuals in there, all of your manuals about your machine tools and your robots and your programmable logic controllers and your ladder logic and your systems and your switches and your sensors, on and on and on. You can put all of that into an LLM, and then using these vector databases, create a queryable database where you can literally write a prompt and ask it a question, and it'll find the answer for you. And they're getting better and better and better. So as we talk to manufacturers, it's like, well, start with that, right? I mean, you've got all of these manuals for all of your equipment, put that in one LLM, and then let your maintenance technicians or your machine operators or your engineers access that and ask it questions, and you'll troubleshoot faster, you'll innovate faster, you'll learn more about your equipment. Really, really cool way of doing it. So it's a super, super exciting era from that standpoint. And credit to you as a leader in a community college for encouraging that among your students, because I think that's really, really important. I guess one of the questions when we think about leadership at any educational level, certainly the community or technical college space, what are you seeing right now around applied artificial intelligence? I talk to a lot of individuals that are leading institutions of higher education. They'll tell you publicly that their institutions have a strategy around AI, that they've got degree programs, that they're embedding it in different programs. Privately, I can tell you that a lot of them are as worried as everybody else about how we lead in this era of artificial intelligence. What are your thoughts on that topic?
Well, I've been kind of talking to people about what I call the 3 Ds, which is design, diagnosis, and data modeling. And it's not, comprehensive by any means, but it's a start for us to kind of think about what we're hearing from industry, maybe what we're seeing from students. And so I talked about, design a little bit, and I think that's a disruptive one. Any area that features design software or is, training somebody to be the designer. I think we have to watch out for AI agents kind of being able to take over that space. Obviously, you're going to need the expert who's going to be able to implement. But if the job is heavily skewed toward doing that design with a CAD program or Revit, there's some indication that there could be some job loss there. So that's one we're keeping an eye on. We all knew this about graphic design when AI really first got big. I mean, everybody said that right away. Well, graphic design is going to go away. But anything that's design oriented in manufacturing is going to face that same issue. And then in diagnosis, and that's, on the production floor, troubleshooting, repair. I mean, I think that's just AI is really going to aid that process. There's been a lot of talk about lawyers and law being disrupted. Well, an electrician is kind of a lawyer in some ways that has, additional, obviously hands-on job responsibility. So they have to keep up with the code. They have to know that and to apply that. And so you're not going to replace what the electrician does on the floor, but they may be able to enhance their ability to use code and to learn code and to keep up to date with that on AI. So, and then the data modeling, we really kind of want to think about ways to get our students introduced to basic data modeling, so that that may be an extra sell for them as they're trying to get that position, is that they know how to pull that data from the production floor and to start to play around with it and to see what we can learn from it. That may not be their sole responsibility as a 2-year degree holder, but that may be a bonus add-on skill for them. And we know that in central Iowa, I mean, we're rapidly moving toward automation in a lot of our facilities, maybe behind some other areas, but that extra ability of the student to be able to know what happens with the data on the production floor and be able to learn a little bit of data modeling, and I think probably to use AI to help them with that, so that's something we're keeping an eye on.
So design, diagnosis, and data modeling, the 3 Ds, is that an Andrew Neindorf original, or where did that come from?
Yeah, that's an Andrew Neindorf original. So I guess, yeah, another testament to that English degree.
I like it. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm going to use that. I always say I'll give you credit the first 3 times, and then I'm just going to steal it from you. But I really,
It's
I, I really,
Here's one to
really
steal.
like the way that you threw that, the way that you put that together. And agreed 100%. Let's dive a little bit into the a little bit deeper into the data modeling side, because I'd be curious on your thoughts on that. When we think, and I think that's the part that to start with agentic AI or AI agents, and if I think our audience is probably familiar, but my definition is it's almost like a digital employee, right? So it's an agent is certainly it's digital, but you can create an agent to do all kinds of things, analyze data, write letters, write an employee review. I mean, there's a bazillion different things that we can use an AI agent for, but that's the whole idea is agentic AI is we're creating a digital employee to perform a task for us. On the data modeling side, agreed, we're teaching students how to gather data, how to format it, how to structure it, how to analyze it, maybe how to use agentic AI or some other platform to find patterns and make predictions or find anomalies or troubleshoot or so on. Any thoughts on a little bit deeper on how we do that? I'd just be interested in what that curriculum and that experience might look like for a student.
Well, I think, you know, statistics would be a good addition. Now, we have applied math in our programs. Students may do some trigonometry, pre-calculus, but I think, statistics has really become a course in a lot of programs, and it's taught more frequently in high school as sort of the required math. So if there's a way for us to introduce some basic statistics that will help them to sort through the data to understand it, I think that would be a good addition. Now, that may not be for every program that we have, but it might be something we want to think about. And then, we talked about Power BI, and I think, DMACC is a Microsoft school, and so that tends to be the program that we use for that. I think there would be a lot of students that would be interested in learning that and applying it. So I think it's really entry level skills that we're talking about. We're not talking about a 4-year engineering degree or master's degree in engineering, but some of those entry level skills could really set them apart. And then maybe that helps them progress in their career as they get more involved, and they can demonstrate that they can work on some of those higher level problems that involve data and statistics. So I think, as always with a community college degree, it's how many of the kind of wide basic skills can we offer our students? And then a lot of times then the employers kind of take over from there, or maybe they come back to us for additional training. So we wouldn't want to get too deep into it, but really an introduction to what that might look like to work with data, and so that they understand, what their eventual employers might be doing with it.
Absolutely. And you think about an associate degree where you have the student for 2 years, a tech diploma, you have them for a year. I mean, there's only so much of this that you can pack into an already really
Right.
busy experience for them. And, I can tell you from experience, it's for as long as you're mentioning the Microsoft platform, when we've had interns come to our businesses who have an understanding of Microsoft Azure or Azure Data Factory, those folks are worth their weight in gold as well in terms of understanding how to use structured and unstructured data for prediction and analysis and so on. So really exciting time for the future of education. Where would you say we're failing in career and technical education in terms of teaching artificial intelligence, Andrew?
Well, I think, there's always kind of this critique that, industry moves fast and education moves slow. And I don't always agree with that. And I do feel that we're responding pretty quickly. This is really kind of a 2-year-old issue in a lot of ways. And
For sure.
most education institutions, didn't ignore it and responded right away, and are responding kind of in the way that their disciplines respond. But I look at this idea that people say that, blue collar jobs are going to be safe and the white collar jobs are going to be eliminated. I think we might be failing by oversimplifying that.
Right.
And what we really need to do is to dig into down to the discipline level and to sort through, well, which of those professions, might be enhanced or might be safe in the context of AI, and which are at risk. We've talked about design a little bit, but I think if we rest on our laurels and just assume that, a career in the trades is going to be completely safe, then we might miss where, AI is going to swoop in and disrupt some of these skills and some of these jobs. So I think the advice I would have is really to get down to the discipline level, to get to understand, where this is going, and to see where there might be opportunities, and to see where we need to be prepared for some disruption. So really not relying on this idea that all trades are going to be safe, because I don't think that's true.
I don't think that's true either. And AI is going to disrupt every single aspect of the workforce. That there's no question. And I think, if you're in a white collar job, the future can be really bright if you understand how AI is going to disrupt that space and you can get ahead of it I think there's some really, really cool opportunities for anybody in a position like that. It's not going to happen on autopilot. I think the same. I keep referencing this blog by Matt Schumer because I read it just last night. But one of the things that he talks about is spend an hour a day with generative AI. And if you're somebody who's worried about your job or your career being threatened, and we all probably should be to some degree, be the person that gets out in front of it and utilizes it. I think that was really, really good advice. And if I had a magic wand and I could make every white collar worker, white collar professional do that, I think I would probably wave that magic wand. If you had a magic wand and you had the opportunity to create the perfect community college around artificial intelligence, what gets packed into that?
Wow, yeah. So I listened to your 6 Days in China podcast, which was really, really fascinating. It
Thank
was
you.
sort of like
Thanks,
every
Todd Wanek. Yeah, that was fun.
yeah, every minute it was like, another surprise kind of going deeper, but the e-commerce clusters was really that was sort of mind-blowing to me. And then this idea of artificial intelligence now being, required in K-12, which I think, a lot of my colleagues would be kind of freaked out by that, but I'm interested to see kind of what they do with it. And I'm assuming it's not going to replace a lot of the basic literacy and math skills. But I think there's a couple of things that in the future are likely to happen. We talked about Kennedy already, so we're kind of coming full circle here. But
Good.
at some point, when we get through this current period, there will have to be a national project around improving manufacturing and around career and technical education in order for us to compete and keep up. So I'm hopeful that that will happen, that moonshot project will occur. And I think that's going to involve, hopefully, more investment in the K-12 system with career and technical education centers. We do have, high school career academies here in Iowa that do a good job of that, but with a greater scope. And so really creating that pipeline, introducing a lot of these fields to students much earlier, and then investing in the equipment and the training and creating those pathways. But I'm really fascinated by what I see as a reemergence of the flipped classroom concept. Like 15 years ago, everybody was talking about that. But I think just with my own children and noticing that the AI can help them figure out, not solve the math problem for them, but walk them through the steps kind of as a tutor, that is only going to improve. And I kind of imagine a sort of, I don't know, like a Roomba or like an AI dog or something that follows the students around, that is the tutor, that isn't giving them the answers, but is able to ask them questions and to help them to enhance the homework aspect of it. And not to replace the instructor, so that they're learning more at home and they're more prepared than when they come in and do the hands-on projects and they work in the classroom. So I really see, whether you call it a tutor or whatever you call it, the ability for students to actually improve on that homework side of things, that preparation, to help them understand better so that they can be, more ready for class. And so I kind of envision this future where we've got more of these defined pathways from K-12 into higher ed for career and technical, and then that AI is on the side to really help them improve their knowledge and their preparation. And then, of course, then the human teacher becomes more important and has more of an impact, and that you get more value out of applying that knowledge when you're, in the classroom or in the lab. So kind of that's my best picture scenario. And I really do think that's going to need to be supported by a national project to enhance, career and technical education.
Yeah, I'm picturing a DNA project or a gene project where we cross Socrates with a dog and end up with this robo dog that follows a student around asking questions and guiding their learning.
Yeah.
So, fascinating future to dream about. Absolutely. Glad you found that 6 Days in China episode with Todd Wanek, the CEO of Ashley Furniture Industries, fascinating. I think just on YouTube, and we're on 48 different platforms. Assuming you saw it on YouTube, I think we had like 135,000 something views on that particular video. So you're not the only one. Just there, not to mention Spotify, Apple Music, and everywhere else that we showed up, that found that one fascinating. But thanks for mentioning that. That was a really, really fun episode, and Ashley doing some really cool stuff in the world of applied artificial intelligence as well. Time for two more quick questions with my now friend Andrew Neuendorf, from Des Moines Area Community College, commonly called DMACC. And Andrew, question number one is there something from your educational journey, and I'm guessing there is, that has drawn you to a conclusion about education that others might find surprising?
Yeah, there's this Mark Twain quote. I think it's something like, I never let my schooling interfere with my education.
Right. Yeah. Love that one.
It's hilarious, but also at the same time, yeah, I obviously we encourage students to complete their programs. Right now at least, the return on investment on getting a certification, getting a degree is very important. But I don't necessarily think that the current model is one that will hold up or that is necessarily important, and that includes letter grades as well. So that formal idea of seat time, letter grades, degrees, diplomas, that could all break down, and I think there could be, a better process in the future. So I guess that's maybe the surprise. Like I'm obviously always encourage students to do as well as they can in class and to earn
Sure.
those degrees and to finish. But I think in the future there could be another model. Who knows? Life expectancy increases, and we're always relearning, and maybe the we shift to more of a focus of competency and skills, and an ongoing learning process as opposed to do your 2 years or do your 4 years. Like we measure learning in time, and I'm not sure that's the best way to do it.
Agreed 100%. Yeah, we're definitely moving to a competency-based education model where it's all about how efficiently can we instill the right competencies and knowledge and abilities and so on in an individual as opposed to how much time you spend in a classroom. And I think the institutions that move more quickly to that model are going to find themselves way ahead of those that don't. Let's ask one more question of Andrew Neuendorf, and that is this: if you go all the way back to before you're this CTE wizard, before the 3Ds that we talked about, before even being an English professor and the education preparation that led to that career, talk a little bit, if you would, Andrew, about going back to give some advice to your 15-year-old self, and if you could tell that individual anything, what would it be?
Well, I wouldn't spoil his theories about JFK because then, I
Right.
wouldn't have built that website. Well, I think, I, I would probably tell Andrew to lean in even more to the humanities side. I think, actually, my daughter's a freshman in college now and she's a history and anthropology major. And I think it's a good time to be a humanities major. And so I would say, I've always been interested in, you talked about philosophy, hey, maybe you should be a philosophy major. Maybe you should push more in the direction, of that, of Cardinal Newman's, idea of the philosopher on one side. But then I would say, hey, learn something hands on.
Mhm.
And, I work a lot with our robotics program. So maybe I would say, hey, keep pushing on the liberal arts side, but maybe dig into robotics as well. If nothing else, it could be a good hobby, but it might prepare you for, your eventual future here, as an associate dean in a manufacturing area. Maybe you'd be able to have more accurate conversations with the faculty members, and they wouldn't be suspicious of your, co-opting their terminology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that cuts both ways. We talk a lot about, in your case, you're talking about someone starting the humanities and learning a hands on skill, really important. And I tell people in the hands on skill space where we spend a lot of time, that humanities aren't going away. And in fact, the understanding of philosophy, of, in my case, theology, kind of what it means to be genuinely human, is those questions are going to be more important in the age of artificial intelligence, not less important. And so having an understanding of the humanity side, super, super important. You and I couldn't agree on that more. We agreed on all kinds of things today, talking about JFK assassination, our fascination with that era of history, and certainly chatting a little bit about applied artificial intelligence in education, about this idea of competency-based learning, about leading our employers where we want them to go, and also being sure that we're really listening to what's happening, how quickly all this stuff in the world of AI is advancing. Andrew, we had so many great things to touch on here. Really appreciate you spending some time with me on the Tech Head podcast.
Well, thanks, Matt, for having me on the show. This has been really, really, really fun.
Fun for me as well, and I'm sure fun for my audience and our audience, I should say, and really appreciate that group of individuals joining us for a really fascinating conversation with Dr. Andrew Neindorf, the Associate Dean of Manufacturing, Engineering, Trades, and Transportation at Des Moines Area Community College. Couple things to do as we wrap up here. First of all, remind you to check out the show notes. We'll put those at let's put them at techedpodcast.com/Neindorf, and I've got to give you that spelling. So that'll be techedpodcast.com/ and it's NEUENDORF. One more time, NEUENDORF. Dorf. That's where the show notes will be. We have the best show notes in the business. We referenced a whole bunch of materials here on the podcast on this episode. We'll put those all there. When you're done, check us out on social. We already mentioned the YouTube channel that is going absolutely crazy. So having so much fun on YouTube. Also check us out on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on TikTok. Pretty much anywhere you go to check out your social media, you will find the Tech Ed Podcast. Our work is that important. We want to find you everywhere. When you find us, please say hello. We would love to hear from you. Looking forward to seeing everybody next week on our next episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. Until then, thanks for joining us. My name is Matt Kirchner, and I'm your host for the Tech Ed Podcast.